Have you ever paused to look at your own hand and wondered about the sheer impossibility of its design? Or looked at a bird in flight and wondered how an organism could possibly develop the mechanics for gravity-defying travel? It's easy to feel like we are the finished product of a grand design, but the reality is much more chaotic, much more fascinating, and much older than you might imagine. We aren't just looking at the history of humans. We are looking at a 3.5 billion year old game of survival that is still being played every single second of every day. This is the story of evolution, the process that explains how primitive, single-celled protozoa could eventually become the millions of diverse species we see today. It is the answer to the question of how a dachshund and a Great Dane can share a common ancestor, yet look like entirely different creatures. To understand this, we need to move past the simple idea of change and look at the actual mechanisms that drive life forward. Before we dive into the how, we have to define our terms. What exactly is a species? A species is a community of animals capable of producing offspring with one another, where those offspring are also capable of reproducing in turn. If two animals mate but their child is sterile, like a horse and a donkey producing a mule, they are not the same species. Evolution is the study of how one species eventually splits, adapts, and transforms into a brand new one. This isn't a ladder where everything is trying to become human. It's a massive, branching tree where every leaf represents a success story in a specific environment. The first major engine of evolution is uniqueness, driven by variation. Look closely at any group of animals, even a litter of kittens. They might look similar, but one is slightly faster, one is a bit bolder, and one might have a slightly thicker coat. This uniqueness is essential because if every individual were identical, a single change in the environment would wipe out the entire group. This variation starts at the cellular level. Every living creature is made of cells, and every cell has a nucleus containing chromosomes. These chromosomes hold your DNA, the fundamental information carrier of life. DNA is made of genes that act as a set of instructions for the cell, determining everything from your height to the color of your eyes. It is precisely this DNA that is unique to every creature, slightly different from individual to individual, which is why each has slightly different characteristics. But how does nature create so much variety in this DNA? One key factor is the excess production of offspring. In nature, creatures generally produce far more children than can possibly survive. Think of a sea turtle laying hundreds of eggs, knowing only a few will make it to adulthood. Often, there are even more offspring than the environment is able to support. This overproduction ensures that as many little differences as possible are entered into the game. The more offspring that are produced, the more little differences occur, and this is what nature wants, as many little differences as possible. Then we have heredity, the passing of this DNA to the next generation. This involves two powerful forces, recombination and mutation. Recombination is the random mixing of the DNA of two creatures. When two creatures mate, they shuffle their genes. The parents each provide 50% of their DNA, but the way that 50% is chosen is totally random. This increases the diversity and differences within a species even further. However, mutation is where the real new stuff comes from. Mutations are random copying errors within the DNA. They can be triggered by toxins, radiation, or just bad luck during cell division. While mutations are often negative or neutral, sometimes leading to illnesses, occasionally they create something positive. Blue eye color in humans started as one such random mutation. If a mutation happens in a germ cell, sperm, or egg, it is passed down, and the species has just upgraded its library of traits. There's a key word here: random. All of these processes, recombination, mutation, and the shuffling of genes, are based on chance. But how can so much be down to chance when all living creatures are so perfectly adapted to their environment? How does a hummingbird end up with the perfect beak for a specific flower if the process is random? The answer is provided by the second key point: selection. Natural selection is the filter that removes the errors and keeps the successes. Each individual is subjected to a process of selection. As we have learned, each individual is somewhat different to its fellows. Environmental influences, predators, parasites, climate, and competition for food act as selection factors. If you have a trait that makes you 1% better at finding food or 1% better at hiding, you are more likely to survive long enough to have babies. Those who don't fit the environment are selected out. They die before they can pass on their DNA. This isn't just theory. We can see it in the famous story of the Darwin finches. A few hundred years ago, a small group of finches was blown onto the Galapagos Islands in the middle of the Pacific. They found a paradise with no predators and an abundance of food. They reproduced rapidly. However, the islands soon became overcrowded. Food supplies became scarce. The finch paradise was threatened with famine, and finch friends became competitors. This is when selection intervened. Their individuality and small differences, specifically their slightly different beaks, meant that some birds were able to avoid competition. Some beaks were better for digging for worms. Others were better for cracking hard seeds. The finches sought out ecological niches where they didn't have to fight everyone else for the same food. They began to mate primarily with other finches that used the same niche. Over many generations, these characteristics were enhanced. Eventually, the differences became so large that the worm diggers and seed crackers could no longer mate with one another. New species emerged as a result. Today, there are 14 different species of finch on the islands, all descended from that same group of stranded ancestors. This is the core of how evolution works. The interaction of unique individuals, the excess production of offspring, recombination and mutation in heredity, and finally, selection. But why is this so important for us to understand? It tells us where the variety of life comes from, and why living creatures are so perfectly adapted to their habitats. But it also affects us personally. We often think of ourselves as separate from nature, but we are its most complex product. Every person is the result of 3.5 billion years of evolution, and that includes you. Think about the legacy software your brain is running. For 99% of human history, we lived in a world where calories were rare. Evolution wired us to crave sugar and fat because back then, those cravings saved our lives. Fast forward to today, and those same survival instincts are causing a health crisis because our environment changed faster than our DNA. This is called evolutionary mismatch. Your weaknesses are often just ancient survival strengths that are currently out of place. Understanding evolution allows us to look at our behavior with compassion instead of just frustration. Evolution also teaches us about the Red Queen effect. In nature, you have to keep running just to stay in the same place. As a predator gets faster, the prey must get faster to survive. If one stops evolving, it goes extinct. This is why 99% of all species that have ever lived are gone. Survival isn't the norm, it's the exception. This means you are part of an incredible success story. Your ancestors fought through ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and mass extinctions. Not a single one of them failed to reach reproductive age. The chain remained unbroken for billions of years. So how do we use this knowledge? We use it to navigate our modern world. Nature doesn't strive for perfection, it strives for good enough. Most people are paralyzed because they are waiting for a perfect plan or a perfect body. Nature, however, launches the beta version and lets the environment fix the bugs. We can take a leaf out of evolution's book, be good enough to start, and then adapt as the selection factors of your life push you to grow. In summary, evolution is a process of random variation filtered by a non-random environment. It's the story of how life refuses to stay still. It shows us that diversity isn't just nice to have, it is the literal requirement for life to continue. Without the glitches and the differences, the first change in the weather would have ended the story of life before it even got to the dinosaurs. You are a biological miracle, built from the wreckage of a billion failed experiments. But for the first time in history, we are a species that understands the game. We can look at our own source code and decide which instincts to follow and which to evolve past. You aren't just a passenger in your own biology. You are a survivor who can consciously steer your own future. The dinosaurs have disappeared, but you are alive, watching this video because you are incredibly special. You are irreproducible and unique in the universe. As we look toward the future, the mechanisms of evolution, variation, heredity, and selection will continue to shape every living thing on this planet. Whether it's bacteria evolving resistance to antibiotics, or humans adapting to a digital world, the engine never stops. By understanding these mechanics, we don't just learn about the past, we learn how to survive the future. Thanks for watching. If this helps you understand the blueprint of life a little better, don't forget to subscribe.